All right, so here we go with section 5.2. So defining and calling a function. We'll take a look at some of this stuff here. Before I talk about it though, don't forget you see a link here. It's an active link in the PowerPoint, but also all the links are available in Canvas. So these are the author links here. So and they're very good. So with functions, you might want to once you take a look at this video, you might want to for this section go back and watch his video for this section too. So just to give you a different perspective, make sure you're grasping it. So anyway, so we have. Some rules for how we're going to name things, and this is exactly the same thing as other things we've seen for like variables, right? So can't have spaces, can't have weird characters, all that kind of good stuff. So anyway, same old thing. But let's take a look at more specifically what a function will look like. So here we go. Function name. Uh, Often includes a verb, but not always. When we're taking a look at this one, if we look at this as an example, so calc net pay, and if we look at this as an example of a function, we're not going to use, like you saw in the last video, the screenshot early in the chapter that the author used that just said, function one, function two, all that. So you want it to be descriptive, just like our variables. We're not using X and Y. We're using descriptive variables when we're setting them up. Okay, so that you know what they are, and it's easier to debug and all that kind of good stuff, right? So this is how this is set up. This first line is what is known as a function header. And so we have DEF, which simply stands for definition. So we're defining this, and we're going to use this as our name. You could use any name you'd like. Again, descriptive. Can't use keywords, that kind of stuff. And then we're going to go over here, and you notice it has two parentheses, and they're just empty, followed by a colon. The parentheses are empty right now, and that's fine. Later on, you'll see we're going to put variables or values in here in order to accept things that are sent into the function, and so you'll see that later. For now, they're just empty, and that's fine. And you see the colon here. Then we have a block of statements. It could be one, could be 1,000, whatever, right? As long as it's indented the same, then you're going to have that particular block that you're going to use. And as soon as we drop back over here, then that's the end of that block of statements, and we keep going down with the code, or in the case of a function, it's going to get sent back. So anyway, so that's that. If we go to the next one, just to recap just real quick. So def, so that's our definition here. This is an example of a block. Okay, so here you see the name is highlighted on this particular one. Coming back over here, here's our block. So whatever your group of statements is. For this one, it just happens to be two. Could be three, like I said before, 1,000, doesn't really matter. Okay, so those are our little pieces. Now the block, very similar. I mean, it's the exact same thing as with ifs and fors and whiles and all that good stuff. It has to be indented. So must be indented the same. So we've got that, and you guys are used to that by now, so I don't need to hammer that into you. So anyway, so I'm gonna skip through that and we'll move on a little bit. So let's take a look at how it works a little bit. I'll put this little program up. I'm going to pull this up in Python Tutor so we can walk through it. But here's an example. Here's our function header. We have a definition of our function. We're calling this message. So there's a message. Here we have the empty parentheses and the colon. Indented in, we have a nice little block right here. So I'm Jeff. I like pizza. Pretty simple stuff. Factual. Anyway, and then we have down here, we're going to call the message function. So remember, when you see the word call, that just simply means execute. So we're running this, that's what we're going to do. So what this does, you notice right here, this is a function call. So it's simply the name of the function followed by empty parentheses. Later on, we're going to send values in there. For now, just empty. And this just says, okay, now I'm ready for you to go over here and run this, and it will execute this particular function. Okay, so that's basically it. When it's done, it has what they refer to as a function return, goes back to that point in the code where it left off, and we'll keep going. All right, so let's take a look at how this looks. Here we are inside Python Tutor. It's a real simple program here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit visualize execution. And you'll see I need to close that out of there. Let's go over and do a little bit of this so I can see it a little bit better. Okay, so remember, as we're looking at this, we've got our first step. So again, ignores the comments. So we're going to say next, and we're going to, let me scroll this back just a little bit. Okay, so we have the next line to execute, and then the green, the line that just executed. So you notice, as we're taking a look at this, if I go back to the first step again, it drops down, ignores the comments, it starts right here. So we're defining message right here, and you'll notice that once I hit next, it goes all the way down to line 9. So there's no reason for the interpreter to run this because it hasn't been called yet. So it's simply registering in a memory that, hey, we have, look at this over here, we have a nice little function in here called message, and great. I'll refer to it later. So boom, here's where it refers to this one right here. Boom, boom, boom. Good stuff. Now we have this. So we're going to execute it now. Now we're saying, okay, go ahead and run it. So when I click next, you'll see it will go back to the code, back to this line again, and now it's actually going to step through the block. So when I hit next here, it's going to drop down here. We're going to see, okay, it's going to print a couple little messages. I'm Jeff. I like pizza. Now watch where the cursor goes. It's just waiting. Notice this little piece right here, return value. We're not sending anything back, but we are returning to where the function was called. So watch where the cursor goes. We drop down here, boom, or set it this way. So we had, if we had extra code here, if we had other things in here and we had something else, so maybe we're just gonna, I don't know, print a little whatever piece here, then what happens is, let's go ahead and step through it again. And you'll see that it will, as it goes through the code, or just a little bit. So we'll do the same thing. Here we go. Function called message. It's going to now execute that code, return back to where it was called, and then keep going in with the rest of the code. Okay, so it's really important as you're doing these things to make sure that you know where it's called and then where it will go back, and so it returns right to that same point, keeps going. Now, if we had this, I'm going to erase this so it's not confusing. Let's say we did this little piece, and I'm going to copy paste this up here. Ignore the comments. We'll just pretend that whatever there. Actually, no, that just still bothers me. Hang on. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call the message here. So the message function right here. So if you click on this, and I'm going to say visualize, this is something that you'll see, and it'll happen. It's the way it goes sometimes. But I'm going to step through this code, and we have next. Notice how now this kind of gives it away a little bit. Step 1 of 1. So it comes down here, and it's going to simply call the function message. Boom. And notice the error that I get down here. Name here, look, name message is not defined. It has no idea what this is. So you can't call it before you've defined it. So line 4 has to go, we have to drop it down to where it originally was. Okay, so this will get you in trouble. All right, so we'll look at some other common errors and those kind of things too. But let's go on. We have one more thing to talk about before we're done with this. So let me go back over here. And you could play with this too. So the link's here if you want to play with it. Really easy to mess around with it. All right, so there's that. Now, we talked about calling, so we know what that is. So execute. And then let's take a look at the last thing that I wanted to mention in here. Now, I showed this in a previous video. These are simply snips from pythontutor.com. And let's talk about the main function. So the main function is the function that the interpreter, when you run the program, when you execute the program, the interpreter goes through the main function, and that's where it starts. That's where it looks to get going, all that kind of good stuff. If you don't have a main function, you don't have a program because it doesn't know what to do. So that's what it looks for. So in C++, it looks for this. In Java, it's going to look for this. That's the way it's set up. And in Python, we don't have to start out with that because it's built in. So it assumes that when you start coding, that is the main function. And until you tell it to go to a different function or a different place, it's going to continue down there and assume that that is the mainline logic of the program, which is just fine. But what I want to have you do, and especially when we're using functions here, is to go ahead and define the main function and pretend like it's not there, like we're in another language. Okay, so here's what I want to, here's an example of what I'm going to show you. This is just a simple program. This is just from the book. So you can refer to it in there. He does it, describes a little bit more if you'd like. And so we're looking at two functions. And for this particular program, we have, in fact, I'm just going to pull this up because, okay, here we go. And I'm going to go back to edit. I wanted to see the coloring. I think it's easier for you to see. Okay, so we have two functions here. And you'll notice that we are defining the main function. So this we didn't have to do before. We could have simply had print, message and print, over on the side, and all that good stuff. But by defining it in main, we can call message here, and it'll drop down here, and then this is where main is called. So we didn't have this before. So the way this program was written before, we only had the definition, and then afterwards we called it. So we put message down here. So I want to show you kind of the difference with this. So if I hit visualize real quick, we're going to go over here so I can see a little bit better, and I'm going to hit next. Okay, so you notice it defines main, puts that function in our in memory here. It's taking that. It's like, hey, we've got this function called main. We're going to refer to it later, possibly, right? And then I'm going to go next right here with message. It does the same thing. So it recognizes that we have two functions here. And then now we call the main function. So that means we're going to go back and execute main. So when I click next, it goes back to main and it says, oh, hey, I have a message for you. So I click next again. Now watch, when you call message here, it skips down to line 9 and executes this. So when I click next again, oh, and by the way, we did have that message up there. There we go. I have a message for you. Sorry, I have this blown up a little bit too much, but anyway, but that's on there. And I'm going to click next again. It's going to walk through this piece. And it's going to say, I'm Jeff, I like pizza. So there we go, boom, boom. Now watch, it will go right back to where it was called before. So I'm going to say next, it goes right back to where message was, follows it down, and here we go down to print goodbye. And then there we go. That's it for what we're doing here. So that's the end of our program, and that's the end. So you'll notice it bounces around. Now, a big difference between the way that this one is done and the way that, as far as calling it, and the way that the first one was done, is I showed you the error message when I just tried to call the not defined, this little piece over here, when I tried to call message before it was defined. I can use this up here above the function now because this is defined in main. So when I am defining this, it finds the function, skips down, finds this function, great, and then it's going to call main down here. So it goes back and now it actually runs the program. So your core program that you have here with what we've been doing the whole semester so far, we haven't been defining main or calling it because we don't have to in Python. It's not required. But I'd like you to get in the habit of doing that because it's something that you're going to have to do in other languages. So now that we're playing with functions, let's mess with this. So instead of just having this little print message over here and all this good stuff, we're going to go ahead and use main. Now, one of the things that you'll find is that define main and set it up. And I would highly recommend to you that you do main as your first function. So define main first. It tends to be a little bit easier. If you end up with 50 functions in here and main is in the middle, it's a pain. So I see people, most of the time I see people use main at the very top or at the very bottom. So the very last one. But I would recommend to you that you use it at the top, makes it easy to find. You see kind of the flow of it, and then you define all of your other functions down below. All right, so all of your program will go in main, except for what you're sending to different functions here. All right, so this is the heart of what we've been doing is in this section. Okay, but one of the things that I'll see as far as a common error is you define this, you hit, execute, and then nothing happens. So if nothing happens and it just ends, and you're like, well, what's the deal? I have all this stuff in here. Don't forget you have to call main down at the very bottom. So once you're done with this stuff and defining all your functions, you're calling main down at the bottom to actually start the program. This is basically what this is us hitting the next button and getting started, right? So visualize execution and then next it gets it going, right? So that's basically what that is doing. All right, so play around with this a little bit, and you can kind of step through, change some things around if you like. If I go in here and I take this piece out and I take this piece out and I drop this back over here, again we're going to get an error message because this hasn't been defined yet. So you'll find this is a great way of doing things. I think you guys will like playing with it once you kind of get the hang of it and see. So anyway, so that's it for this one. There's a lot in this one. So play with these two programs and a little bit. See if you can figure out how they work and try throwing some parent messages, in here or like in the other one, like over here. Throw some other things in. Remember, this one had an error because you can't call message ahead. So anyway, so play with these and see how you do. And don't forget about our author's video. He does walk through it a little bit differently in the video link in Canvas, the 5.2 video, which is right here also. So anyway, have fun.